Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my book corner, and today's review is for another indie recent release, Cold Silver for Souls by Tori Tecken. So this came out on May 27th of 2025. The paperback comes in at 286 pages. The version that I read was the Kindle ebook at 280 pages, and this is a aesthetically Western fantasy story. As always, we shall talk about the story, the characters, the world building, and the presentation before my final thoughts at the end of the video. So let's just dive straight in. This is a tale of two halves to me in many regards, with the first half being more of an establishment of the way the world works, as we follow the character of Hunter. Hunter is a collector of bounties, but not only is she a bounty hunter of some repute with this sort of frontier attitude, she's also a necromancer who is followed around by an undead corpse named Rip, who she can command. And this makes her even more of an outcast from society than would otherwise be the case. Hunter takes on a job to go and track down someone who's stolen from the mayor of the local town, goes off, finds them dead, retrieves the silver that they've stolen, fetches it back, although a few issues do happen along the way. Now, the head of the town, who is also the head of the mining operation, named McBride, really wants Hunter to work for him. Partially because of the necromancy stuff and some resonance that necromancy and magic in general has with something called cold silver. So, worth bearing that in mind. She agrees to do one more job because of some things that happened in town just before she left, and ends up going out with another bounty hunter named Paulie Torrance to track down some other people who have kind of been nicking from the local mine. These just turn out to be teenagers. Paulie shoots a number of them because he's just that kind of guy. But Hunter manages to save one, kind of takes them under the wing. They go back, report everything. She kind of vouches for him to take him away and makes her way south, with McBride still wanting her to be on his employ. And this is where you sort of move into more of a companion piece for the characters, as you have this sort of rogue outcast, always on their own character, going off and taking someone under their wing, feeling a bit protective and beginning to build their first real human bond for quite some time, other than a couple of friendships that they do already have. They move south, she's trying to find somewhere for him to go, but things take a turn as new people in new towns happen and old decisions begin to catch up with them. And this begins to test not just the friendship that's built, but the morals that Hunter has as well, and their own beliefs. This is a really, really solid story. It does a great job of establishing the world in the first half, and in the second half, it's a really interesting look at how Hunter begins to realize what they've been missing. So overall, I think this is a really, really strong book one in a series. It does a good job of establishing the world and the character dynamics as well. And overall, I think this works as a very solid framing device to get us started into this world. As for character work, then, and I have touched on it in the story, the first half feels like we're establishing the world. The second half feels more of a character piece as we discover more about Hunter. And whilst we don't get the full story of Hunter's relationship with the corpse in Rip, there's clearly something there. But what you do have here is the constant reinforcement of Hunter as an outcast who has been shunned by most of society because of their necromancy and the beliefs around that. And whilst they are clearly a very effective bounty hunter, they still have that sort of issue in their way. And we see this on a number of occasions where they go back to various towns where they've been in the past that are entirely hostile towards her. And this informs the level of distrust that Hunter has overall. And we do begin to see that for as she travels, I should say, with Johnny. Now, Johnny is an interesting character because he's a runaway and therefore has that sort of outcast thing as well, escaping from their family. Certainly a history of abuse is there as well. And this starts to tug a little bit on Hunter's heartstrings and just wants to see him safe. And you have this gradual thawing of the character, which they begin to feel really, really uncomfortable with because it feels wrong to them. And they're almost fighting against these new instincts based on their previous history. You need other characters to come in and kind of course correct her a little bit. Now, there are characters that are friendly to Hunter. Specifically, you have Reverend Ambrose, who is a priest in the town where she initially grew up, who, unlike the rest of the townspeople, still seems to see good in her. You also have a character called Addie, who is basically a hotelier in one of the big cities, who has a magic of their own as well. And they very much act as stabilizing presences when Hunter's around, or when Hunter's around them, I should say. And kind of almost acts as a surrogate consciousness in some ways, especially when Hunter reacts in the most negative ways that she can, which really does push Johnny away as a character. Now, Johnny has some things in their story which is really interesting to touch on as well, which does play into the dynamic between the two, but I don't want to mention that here without ruining anything. And also, I do like the fact that the decisions that Hunter makes, which they constantly second guess throughout the book, do come back to prey on her later on because she's going against her normal instincts and doing the right thing, and that does come with consequences quite late on. As for the other characters, Johnny gets a fair bit of time in the story. You see this character, this really nervous runaway, who appears to be from some sort of life of privilege, begin to settle into this new place and begin to take in the world and have some of those edges kind of shaved off, which is really, really good to see, especially some of the friendships that he develops as well. And also this almost looking up to Hunter as well. And the way that this book ends is worth mentioning as well, with the focus on friendship. For despite how ostracized Hunter is as a character, because of the choices that she has made and the handful of friendships as well that she has developed, that really does play into towards the end of the book. You do have a couple of antagonistic characters in here as well. You have McBride, who is clearly the tycoon, the one who's out for the money, who makes the big thing of being fair and just and stuff like that, but really is just out for their own profit. You have a couple of different bounty hunters as well. Specifically, you have Paulie Torrance, who is just an asshat, and you have Joe Farstep, who is ex-military and just seems like a decent human being in many regards, which we don't get a huge amount of time with her. But you almost have like these three characters on a spectrum for guns for hire in terms of other wording, if that's the best way I can put it. I really do like the journey that Hunter goes on in this. I like the journey as well that Johnny goes on, and I like the theming, especially towards the end of this camaraderie. Works really, really well for me. And it does work well within the state of the world, and it acts as a great introduction to these characters for their tales going forward. For a relatively short book, this does a really, really good job with its world building, building on the idea of these frontier towns that are ramshackle and run down, and how power is more centralized in some of the bigger towns, and how corruption works in those towns as well. Working from the outside into like the mountains where Hunter initially goes, and how they've been abandoned because of how harsh the weather is in those areas, how cold it is, the snowfall, and we actually see Hunter, who is used to these areas as well. Even she struggles in these conditions. You can see why these places have been abandoned, despite the fact there is wealth to gain here. And you start to get some more sort of hints towards more supernatural elements in those places as well, with shades being around and being more prominent than they have been previously, which suggests that something coming in future books. I suspect that is probably some form of foreshadowing. And then you start to hit your frontier towns, Paradise, where Hunter grew up being the key one, where even the sign for the town is just sort of fallen down and broken, and you have this very small community, very close-knit, quite hostile to those that they don't like. You've got almost a pious sort of nature because you have your little church there with your reverend, very much the centre of the community. And then as you go towards your bigger, more affluent cities, you have this idea of this, the rich magnates and the money being in charge, and you actually see this play out in terms of the way justice is met out and how the sheriffs actually investigate things. And the switching of power dynamic purely based on money becomes more and more obvious. To give it an idea of this being, whilst not necessarily a lawless place, certainly not a just one, which is really, really well done. And the environmental storytelling that goes along with that, the descriptions of the places, works really well. And again, you begin to see a contrast the further south we go as we go towards the bigger cities, or towns, I should say, works really, really well. But not just that, we have a few little snatches in dialogue as well, which reinforce the fact some things around magic, especially necromancy being the focus, due to Hunter being the main character, and how it's seen as that person doesn't have a soul. And we get some little bits on how necromancy works as well in here. You have the special ore, which is linked magically in some way, although it's slightly unclear at this point exactly how that works, but it almost seems to work like an amplifier. And we get hints of other forms of magic as well, be it whatever the shades are in the north, or even like characters like Addy who have their own, almost like their glamour, which suggests there's more types of magic in the world as well. Some of which are more acceptable than others. But not just that, you have the idea of old money versus new money playing out as well. And it does a really, really good job of showing this ever-changing relationship, this frontier nature. And then you do have the people that are coming in who believe in justice, and then they're faced with the fact that justice out here isn't just, which I really, really liked. And the amount it manages to fit in its under 300-page turn time is actually really, really impressive. Presentation, then I'm going to start on the cover, and what I find fascinating about the cover is the portrayal of Hunter themselves. They're front and center, as you would expect. They are the POV character, but their colors really pop on the front cover compared to like the cold, not subdued is the wrong word for the background, but it's very cold, almost muted sort of color scheme with the blues and the whites. And then you've got front and center with the red hair, this almost color pop of the main character. And that fascinates me when you consider the way the world use Hunter within the book, because they're a necromancer, they're soulless, they're evil. And generally speaking, if you're going to portray that in a visual form, they'd be the least vibrant thing within a picture, whereas here they are the pop of life and colour, which is the antithesis of the way that character is seen by the population, and I love that. The other thing I love is this has a map. I've spoken about maps before on the channel. I love a map in a book. It gives me a sense of distance and location in the world. It's a really simple part of world building, even if it's just a basic map, or even an inaccurate map and just a map that the character has. Always really, really helps. Where this shines is the writing. This is my second Tori Tecken book. This feels very, very different to the Bloodstones in terms of everything, in terms of pacing, in terms of the way the world is built. This is a lot more passive in its world building than Bloodstones was, partially because of the brevity of the book, I suspect. But this is a far faster pace as well. And this is a rare book for me where I didn't want to put it down, which feels like a weird thing to say, but even books that I really, really enjoy, I'll hit a point where it's like, that's enough for today. This one, I wanted to keep reading it, and I was really annoyed when I had to go to work and couldn't. I'd actually complained when I went to work because I wasn't reading this book. Because even in the downtime, there is enough interesting stuff going on to keep pulling you along, and you want to turn that next page and see that next chapter. Now, this is a case where the shorter chapter lengths that this has actually does work really well in helping to maintain that sense of pace and constant changing as well. And actually, this is a case where I actually do like the shorter chapter length. It's something that I don't say very often. The writing as well is quite upbeat for the majority of the story until it's not. And it has these moments that are really, really dark. And that works so well too, especially thematically with the necromancy of Hunter as well. So I'm very excited to see where this goes. Overall, I think this is excellently written. I love the cover. It has a map. It's plotted well. It's paced well. Absolutely no complaints on the presentation of this one. Final thoughts on this one then. This is a great little read. It's a long time since I've read anything with kind of a Western aesthetic or feel to it, especially outside of sci-fi, interestingly enough. So to bounce into this here was a lot of fun. And I'm saying that despite the fact that this has some really dark moments. The more I think about it, it has some really, really dark moments. But they don't overpower the story and the journey the characters are going on, they merely inform it. Add that to the fact you feel like you have this truly dynamic world that is constantly changing as it would have been on the Frontiers. And that makes this a really intriguing read that just pulls you along constantly. If you like the sort of the Frontier vibe, or you like a little bit of light fantasy elements in your story, linked in with a complete character arc and some character growth, this is a really, really solid book to pick up. I also didn't realize this was a book one. This could end at the end of this book, and I'd be relatively content. The characters went on their full arc. They completed the arc. It felt like the first part of the story was told. I really want to see where it goes next, especially as there is an epilogue chapter, which has me really, really curious about what the next stage is going to be. And there is foreshadowing, I suspect, for other stuff as well that's going to go on. But even just on its own, this stands as its own story, and I really appreciate that. But that is my thoughts on Cold Silver for Souls by Tori Tecken. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please consider giving it a thumbs up. It does help the channel out. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all very soon.